October 15, 1945. The morning sun cast long shadows across the makeshift detention facility in Okinawa, where 87 Japanese women sat in silence, their traditional clothing torn and stained from months of hiding in caves and jungle undergrowth. These were not soldiers, but nurses, teachers, and civilians who had served the Japanese imperial forces as support personnel during the final months of the Pacific conflict. They believed they would face execution or worse at the hands of their American captors, just as their military leaders had warned them for years. What they could never have imagined was that their first taste of enemy food would fundamentally challenge everything they had been taught about the barbarity of the Western world. Before we dive into this story, make sure to subscribe to the channel and tell me in the comments where you're watching from. It really helps support the channel. This is the extraordinary account of how a simple meal became a bridge between two cultures that had been locked in mortal combat, and how the power of unexpected kindness would transform the lives of women who had prepared themselves for death, only to discover the complex humanity of their former enemies. Sachiko Tanaka pressed her back against the rough wooden wall of the detention barracks, her eyes fixed on the American soldiers who moved with casual efficiency outside the wire fence. At 23 years old, she had served as a communications operator for the Japanese Army Medical Corps on Okinawa, translating intercepted radio transmissions and coordinating supply deliveries to field hospitals. Her black hair, once perfectly arranged in the traditional style expected of unmarried women, now hung loose and unkempt around her shoulders. The cotton blouse and dark skirt she wore were the same ones she had put on 3 weeks earlier when American forces had finally discovered the cave system where she and dozens of other Japanese personnel had been hiding since the island fell. The other women in the barracks represented a cross-section of Japanese society that had been mobilized for the conflict effort. Nurse Keiko Yamamoto, a 30-year-old woman from Hiroshima, had tended to wounded soldiers in underground hospitals carved from coral rock. Teacher Michiko Sato, only 19, had been assigned to educate the children of Japanese settlers and military families stationed on the island. Radio operator Yuki Nakamura, 26, had spent her days monitoring Allied communications and weather reports. Each woman carried with her the weight of imperial ideology that had shaped their understanding of duty, sacrifice, and the nature of their enemies. Lieutenant Colonel James Morrison of the United States Army's Civil Affairs Division stood outside the detention facility, reviewing the files that had been compiled on the Japanese personnel now in American custody. At 38 years old, Morrison had spent 2 decades in military service, including previous deployments in the European theater, where he had supervised displaced persons camps in France and Belgium. His weathered face bore the marks of sun exposure and stress, but his grey eyes held a thoughtful intelligence that had served him well in navigating the complex challenges of occupation duty. Morrison had been tasked with establishing processing procedures for Japanese prisoners and civilians who were being held pending repatriation arrangements with the Japanese government. The official military guidelines were clear about providing adequate food and medical care in accordance with international conventions, but the reality of implementation in the Pacific theater had proven more complicated than planners in Washington had anticipated. Supply lines were stretched thin, and the cultural barriers between American personnel and Japanese detainees had created unexpected challenges. Captain Robert Chen, a Japanese-American officer from San Francisco who served as Morrison's primary interpreter, had been working to establish communication protocols with the detained women. At 29 years old, Chen had volunteered for military service despite the internment of his own family during the early years of the conflict, driven by a desire to prove his loyalty to America while also serving as a bridge between cultures. His fluency in Japanese had made him invaluable in the Pacific theater, but the complexity of translating not just language, but cultural concepts had tested his skills in ways he had never anticipated. The detention facility itself was a hastily constructed compound of wooden barracks buildings surrounded by chain-link fence, built on what had previously been a Japanese administrative complex near Naha. The buildings had been designed to house approximately 100 individuals, with separate facilities for men and women. Basic amenities included communal washing areas, latrines, and a central mess hall where meals were distributed twice daily. Medical care was provided by American military doctors who made regular rounds, though communication with patients remained challenging despite the presence of interpreters. Sergeant First Class Maria Rodriguez from El Paso, Texas, had been assigned as the primary liaison for the women's barracks. At 27 years old, Rodriguez had joined the Women's Army Corps in 1942 and had served in administrative roles in California before volunteering for overseas duty in the Pacific. Her experience managing personnel and supplies had made her well suited for the complex logistics of detention facility operations, but nothing in her training had prepared her for the cultural sensitivities involved in working with Japanese women who viewed capture as a form of dishonor that could never be erased. The morning of October 15th began like any other at the detention facility, with American personnel conducting their routine security checks and meal preparations. The Japanese women had established their own informal hierarchy within the barracks, with older and more senior individuals taking responsibility for maintaining order and ensuring that traditional protocols were observed as much as possible under the circumstances. They woke before dawn, arranged their sleeping areas with meticulous care, and gathered in small groups for quiet conversations conducted in whispers that would not disturb the guards. Sachiko had emerged as an unofficial spokesperson for the group, partly due to her limited English vocabulary acquired through her communications work, but primarily because of her calm demeanor and ability to navigate the complex social dynamics among women from different social backgrounds and regions of Japan. She had been responsible for coordinating requests for basic necessities and serving as the primary point of contact when American personnel needed to communicate information to the detainees. The standard meal routine at the detention facility consisted of rice-based dishes prepared by American military cooks who had received basic training in Asian food preparation. Breakfast typically included rice porridge with occasional additions of canned vegetables or small portions of protein. Lunch and dinner followed similar patterns, with the cooks making efforts to approximate Japanese flavors using available ingredients from military supply channels. The women had accepted these meals without complaint, understanding that their captors were making efforts to provide culturally appropriate food despite the limitations of wartime logistics. However, on the morning of October 15th, an unexpected development would alter the routine in ways that none of the facility's residents could have anticipated. A supply convoy that had been delayed for 3 days due to typhoon damage to port facilities finally arrived at the detention compound, carrying not only standard military rations, but also a shipment of special provisions that had been intended for American troops stationed at a recreation facility on a nearby island. The convoy's cargo manifest included cases of Coca-Cola syrup concentrate, portable carbonation equipment, ground beef, hamburger buns, and condiments that had been ordered to provide American servicemen with familiar foods from home during their rest and recreation periods. Due to a clerical error in the supply chain, these items had been delivered to the detention facility instead of their intended destination, creating an immediate logistical challenge for Morrison and his staff. Lieutenant Morrison reviewed the supply manifest with Captain Chen, considering their options for redirecting the misdelivered items to their proper destination. However, a radio communication from the recreation facility informed them that the typhoon had severely damaged the facility's kitchen equipment, making it impossible to utilize the special food supplies for several weeks while repairs were completed. Rather than allow the perishable items to spoil in storage, Morrison made a decision that would have far-reaching consequences for both his personnel and the Japanese detainees under his supervision. The decision to share the American food supplies with the Japanese women was motivated by practical considerations rather than any ideological agenda. Morrison recognized that the ground beef would need to be consumed within a few days to avoid spoilage in the tropical climate, and his own personnel were already adequately supplied with standard military rations. From a purely logistical standpoint, distributing the food to the detainees represented an efficient use of available resources, while also providing an opportunity to observe how Japanese individuals responded to American dietary staples. Captain Chen expressed some concern about the potential cultural implications of serving American food to the Japanese women, noting that their traditional dietary restrictions and cultural associations with foreign foods might create unexpected complications. However, Morrison decided that the potential benefits of demonstrating American hospitality and abundance outweighed the risks of cultural misunderstanding, particularly given the ongoing efforts to establish cooperative relationships that would facilitate the eventual repatriation process. Sergeant Rodriguez was tasked with coordinating the meal preparation and distribution, working with the facility's kitchen staff to adapt the American recipes for preparation in large quantities. The process of creating hamburgers for nearly 100 individuals required careful planning and coordination, particularly given the limited cooking equipment available at the detention facility. The kitchen staff, most of whom had no previous experience preparing hamburgers in institutional settings, approached the task with a combination of enthusiasm and uncertainty about the final results. The preparation process began in the early afternoon, with American personnel working to mix the ground beef with seasonings and form individual patties for cooking. The portable carbonation equipment was assembled to produce fresh Coca-Cola from the syrup concentrate, creating a beverage that few of the Japanese women would have ever encountered in their previous lives. The hamburger buns were heated and prepared with condiments that included ketchup, mustard, and pickles, representing a combination of flavors that bore no resemblance to traditional Japanese cuisine. As the aroma of cooking beef began to drift across the detention compound, the Japanese women gathered near the windows of their barracks, watching with curiosity as American personnel engaged in food preparation activities that appeared unlike anything they had observed during their weeks in custody. Sachiko translated the fragments of conversation she could understand for the other women, explaining that their captors appeared to be preparing some form of special meal, though the purpose and nature of the food remained unclear. Nurse Yamamoto observed the cooking process with professional interest, noting the apparent care and attention that the American personnel were devoting to food preparation. Her experience in medical settings had given her an appreciation for the importance of nutrition in maintaining health and morale, but the elaborate nature of the meal preparation suggested motivations that went beyond simple sustenance. She shared her observations with the other women, speculating about the significance of the American food and its potential implications for their treatment as prisoners. Teacher Sato, the youngest of the group, watched the proceedings with a mixture of curiosity and apprehension that reflected her limited experience with foreign customs and foods. Her education had included some information about Western dietary practices, but the theoretical knowledge bore little resemblance to the reality of observing American soldiers engaged in the practical work of meal preparation. She whispered questions to the older women about the appropriateness of consuming foreign food and the potential consequences of participating in what appeared to be an American cultural ritual. Radio operator Nakamura approached the situation with the analytical mindset that had served her well in her communications work, attempting to understand the strategic implications of the American decision to provide special food to their Japanese captives. Her experience monitoring enemy communications had given her insights into American military procedures and decision-making processes, but the current situation seemed to fall outside the normal patterns of prisoner administration that she had observed through intercepted transmissions. The other women in the barracks represented a diverse range of backgrounds and perspectives that influenced their individual responses to the developing situation. Some had worked closely with Western civilians or military personnel in their previous positions and possessed greater familiarity with foreign customs and foods. Others came from rural areas or traditional families where contact with Western culture had been limited or actively discouraged. These differences created a complex dynamic within the group as they attempted to reach consensus about how to respond to the American offer of special food. By late afternoon, the hamburgers had been cooked and assembled according to American standards, with each sandwich consisting of a beef patty, lettuce, tomato, onion, pickles, ketchup, and mustard on a toasted bun. The visual presentation bore no resemblance to any food that the Japanese women would have recognized as appropriate for consumption, but the aroma was undeniably appealing after weeks of subsisting on simple rice-based meals. The Coca-Cola had been prepared and chilled as much as possible, given the limitations of the facility's refrigeration equipment. Sergeant Rodriguez approached the women's barracks with Captain Chen to explain the nature of the meal that had been prepared, and to invite their participation in what American personnel hoped would be received as a gesture of goodwill. Chen's translation carefully emphasized that consumption of the food was entirely voluntary, and that standard rice meals would continue to be available for those who preferred familiar options. The explanation included basic information about the ingredients and preparation methods, though the cultural context of Hamburgers and Coca-Cola proved challenging to convey through direct translation. Sachiko listened carefully to Chen's explanation, asking several clarifying questions about the nature of the beef and the contents of the various condiments and seasonings. Her concerns reflected both practical considerations about dietary restrictions and cultural implications that might arise from consuming food that was so fundamentally different from traditional Japanese cuisine. She consulted quietly with the other senior women before responding that the group would consider the offer and provide their decision after brief deliberation. The internal discussion among the Japanese women revealed the complexity of their situation and the various factors that influenced their decision-making process. Some argued that accepting American food represented a form of cooperation with their captors that might be interpreted as betrayal of their loyalty to Japan. Others countered that refusing the offer might be seen as ingratitude that could result in harsher treatment or reduced access to basic necessities. A third perspective suggested that participation in the meal might provide valuable intelligence about American customs and capabilities that could be useful information upon their eventual return to Japan. Nurse Yamamoto advocated for acceptance based on her medical assessment that the additional protein and calories would be beneficial for the health of women who had endured months of inadequate nutrition during their time hiding in caves and jungle environments. Her professional judgment carried significant weight with the group, as several of the women had experienced health problems that she had helped address using traditional remedies and limited medical supplies. She argued that their physical well-being should take precedence over abstract concerns about cultural purity or political implications. Teacher Sato expressed concern about the appropriateness of consuming food that had been prepared according to foreign customs and religious practices. Her traditional upbringing had instilled strong beliefs about the spiritual and cultural significance of food preparation and consumption, making her reluctant to participate in what she perceived as a potentially polluting activity. However, she also acknowledged that their current circumstances were unprecedented and that normal social conventions might not apply to their situation as prisoners in foreign custody. Radio operator Nakamura pointed out that their captors had invested considerable time and resources in preparing the special meal, suggesting that refusal might be interpreted as rejection of an offer that was intended to demonstrate American generosity and cultural superiority. Her analysis of intercepted communications had revealed the importance that Americans placed on food as a symbol of prosperity and technological advancement, making their offer potentially significant from a diplomatic perspective. After approximately 30 minutes of discussion, the women reached a consensus that they would participate in the meal as a group, with the understanding that individual women remained free to decline specific foods or portions that they found objectionable. Sachiko informed Captain Chen of their decision, emphasizing their appreciation for the gesture, while also requesting assurance that their participation would not be interpreted as acceptance of American political or cultural values. The meal service began in the early evening, with American personnel setting up tables and chairs in the central courtyard of the detention compound. The informal setting represented a significant departure from the institutional atmosphere that had characterized previous meal distributions, creating an environment that resembled a community gathering more than a prison facility. Japanese women filed out of their barracks in small groups, maintaining the quiet dignity and careful behavior that had marked their conduct throughout their period of detention. Each woman received a hamburger wrapped in paper, along with a bottle of Coca-Cola and a small portion of what Americans called potato chips, though these had been substituted with crackers due to supply limitations. The presentation of the food was unlike anything they had encountered, both in terms of the individual packaging and the combination of flavors and textures that comprised each element of the meal. American personnel stood nearby, available to provide assistance or explanations, but avoiding direct interference with the women's experience of the food. Sachiko unwrapped her hamburger carefully, examining each component with the methodical attention that she had applied to her technical work as a communications operator. The beef patty was larger and more heavily seasoned than any protein she had previously encountered, while the combination of vegetables and condiments created a complex flavor profile that bore no resemblance to traditional Japanese seasonings. She took a small experimental bite, chewing slowly while her mind processed the unfamiliar tastes and textures. The initial reaction was one of surprise rather than either pleasure or displeasure. The beef was tender and flavorful, but the seasoning included spices and herbs that were completely foreign to her palate. The lettuce and tomato provided familiar textures, though they had been prepared and presented in ways that differed from traditional Japanese vegetable preparations. The most challenging element was the combination of sweet ketchup and tangy pickles, which created flavor contrasts that seemed to conflict with her understanding of how food should be balanced and harmonized. Nurse Yamamoto approached the hamburger with the analytical mindset of a medical professional, considering the nutritional value and quality of each ingredient as she consumed them. Her assessment was largely positive, noting the high protein content of the beef and the vitamin content of the fresh vegetables. However, she also observed that the overall caloric density and fat content were significantly higher than traditional Japanese meals, reflecting what she perceived as fundamental differences in American and Japanese approaches to nutrition and dietary balance. Teacher Sato took the smallest possible bites of each component, approaching the foreign food with the caution that her traditional upbringing had instilled regarding unfamiliar substances and practices. Her initial reaction was one of cultural discomfort, more than gustatory displeasure, as the very act of consuming food that had been prepared according to foreign customs felt like a violation of principles that had been central to her identity and worldview. However, she also recognized that the flavors themselves were not unpleasant, merely different from anything within her previous experience. Radio operator Nakamura found herself unexpectedly impressed by the complexity and richness of the hamburger's flavor profile. Her analytical nature led her to attempt to identify the various seasonings and preparation methods that had been used, though many of the techniques and ingredients remained mysteries that she filed away for future investigation. She observed that the Americans had invested considerable skill and effort in creating food that was both nutritionally substantial and aesthetically appealing, suggesting levels of culinary sophistication that contradicted the propaganda descriptions of Western barbarity that had shaped her expectations. The Coca-Cola proved to be an even more revolutionary experience for the Japanese women than the hamburgers. None of them had previously encountered carbonated beverages of any kind, and the combination of intense sweetness, caffeine stimulation, and effervescent sensation created a sensory experience that was completely outside their frame of reference. The initial reaction of several women was to cough or gasp in surprise, not from any negative qualities of the beverage, but simply from the unexpected nature of the carbonation. Sachiko's first sip of Coca-Cola produced a momentary shock that was followed by curiosity about the complex flavors that seemed to reveal themselves in layers as she continued drinking. The intense sweetness was initially overwhelming, but she found that smaller sips allowed her to appreciate subtle flavor notes that reminded her of certain traditional Japanese sweets and herbal preparations. The carbonation created a tingling sensation that was initially strange but became more pleasant as she adjusted to the unfamiliar experience. The caffeine content of the Coca-Cola began to produce noticeable effects within minutes of consumption, creating levels of alertness and energy that the women had not experienced during their weeks of captivity. Several women commented on the sensation to their companions, wondering whether the beverage contained medicinal herbs or stimulating substances that might account for its energizing properties. The experience reinforced their growing sense that American food production involved technological capabilities and scientific knowledge that exceeded their previous understanding. As the meal progressed, conversations began to develop among the women about their reactions and observations regarding the American food. These discussions were conducted in quiet voices and respectful tones, but they revealed a growing sense of curiosity and even appreciation for the effort and resources that their captors had invested in providing them with a special dining experience. The gesture seemed to contradict many of the assumptions they had held about American attitudes toward Japanese prisoners and civilians. Nurse Yamamoto observed that several women appeared to be experiencing improved energy levels and elevated mood as a result of consuming the high-calorie American meal. Her medical training led her to speculate that the increased protein and sugar intake might be addressing nutritional deficiencies that had developed during their period of inadequate diet while hiding from American forces. She made mental notes about the potential therapeutic value of certain American foods, information that might prove valuable in future medical practice. Teacher Sato found herself reconsidering some of the assumptions about Western culture that had been central to her educational training and personal worldview. The care and attention that American personnel had devoted to preparing an appealing and nutritious meal for their prisoners seemed inconsistent with the narrative of Western materialism and spiritual emptiness that had been emphasized in Japanese educational curricula. She began to wonder what other aspects of American culture might differ from the representations that had shaped her understanding. Radio operator Nakamura was particularly struck by the industrial and logistical capabilities that the meal represented. The quality and consistency of the ingredients suggested manufacturing and distribution systems that operated on scales far beyond anything she had observed in Japan. The ability to produce complex foods like hamburger buns and Coca-Cola in large quantities and transport them across vast ocean distances indicated technological and organizational capabilities that had significant implications for understanding American military and economic power. The other women in the group displayed a range of reactions that reflected their individual backgrounds and personalities. Some approached the foreign food with enthusiasm and curiosity, eager to experience new flavors and sensations that they might never again have the opportunity to encounter. Others remained more cautious and reserved, consuming only small portions while carefully observing the reactions of their companions and the responses of their American captors to their participation in the meal. American personnel who observed the meal maintained respectful distance while remaining available to provide assistance or answer questions through Captain Chen's interpretation. Lieutenant Morrison moved quietly among the tables, noting the generally positive response of the Japanese women to the food and the relaxed atmosphere that had developed during the meal service. His assessment was that the gesture had achieved its intended purpose of demonstrating American goodwill while also providing practical benefits in terms of nutrition and morale. Sergeant Rodriguez coordinated the logistics of the meal service with her characteristic efficiency, ensuring that all participants had adequate portions while also maintaining appropriate security protocols and facility procedures. Her observation was that the Japanese women had displayed remarkable dignity and courtesy throughout the meal, maintaining their respectful behavior while also expressing genuine appreciation for the special treatment they had received from their captors. Captain Chen found himself serving not only as a translator, but also as a cultural interpreter, helping both American personnel and Japanese detainees navigate the complex social dynamics that surrounded the sharing of food across cultural and political boundaries. His dual perspective as a Japanese American allowed him to appreciate the significance of the gesture for both groups, while also recognizing the potential for misunderstanding and misinterpretation that could arise from cultural differences. As the meal concluded and the women began to return to their barracks, conversations continued about the experience and its implications for their understanding of their captors and their situation. Several women expressed surprise at the quality and quantity of food that had been provided, noting that their treatment had been far more generous than they had been led to expect based on military propaganda about American brutality toward prisoners. Sachiko reflected on the contrast between her expectations of captivity and the reality of her treatment by American forces. The meal had been only one element of a broader pattern of behavior that seemed to contradict the narrative of Western barbarism that had been central to Japanese military ideology. The Americans had provided medical care, adequate shelter, and now special food that exceeded basic subsistence requirements, suggesting motivations and values that were more complex than simple domination or revenge. The psychological impact of the meal extended beyond the immediate sensory experience of consuming unfamiliar foods. For many of the women, the gesture represented their first concrete evidence that Americans were capable of generosity and consideration toward their former enemies, challenging fundamental assumptions about the nature of the conflict and the character of the opposing forces. This realization created cognitive dissonance that would require careful processing and integration with their existing worldview. The following morning, discussions about the meal continued among the women as they reflected on both the immediate experience and its broader implications. Several women expressed interest in learning more about American food preparation methods and dietary customs, recognizing that their exposure to Western cuisine represented an opportunity to gain knowledge that might be valuable in the post-conflict world that awaited them upon repatriation. Nurse Yamamoto began to consider the potential medical applications of certain American foods and preparation methods, particularly the high protein content and nutritional density that could benefit patients suffering from malnutrition or other health conditions. Her professional interest in nutrition led her to ask Captain Chen for additional information about American dietary science and food production methods, though detailed technical information was not readily available at the detention facility. Teacher Sato found herself questioning aspects of the curriculum she had taught regarding Western culture and values. The evidence of American consideration for prisoner welfare seemed to contradict the characterizations of Western materialism and moral corruption that had been central to her educational training. She began to wonder what other aspects of her teaching might have been based on incomplete or inaccurate information about foreign cultures and societies. Radio operator Nakamura continued to analyze the strategic implications of American food production and distribution capabilities, recognizing that the ability to provide high-quality meals to prisoners represented only a small fraction of the logistical systems that supported American military operations across the Pacific. Her growing appreciation for American industrial capacity led her to reconsider her assessments of the likely outcomes of the conflict and the prospects for Japanese recovery in the post-conflict period. The impact of the meal experience extended beyond the immediate participants to influence the broader dynamics within the detention facility. American personnel observed that the Japanese women appeared more relaxed and cooperative in their interactions following the special meal, suggesting that gestures of goodwill could produce practical benefits in terms of facility management and prisoner relations. This observation informed subsequent decisions about prisoner treatment and the allocation of resources for special activities and programs. Lieutenant Morrison incorporated lessons learned from the meal service into his recommendations for prisoner administration procedures that were forwarded to higher military authorities. His report emphasized the value of cultural sensitivity and the strategic benefits of demonstrating American prosperity and generosity to individuals who would eventually return to Japan with their impressions of American treatment and values intact. The potential for soft power influence through humanitarian gestures became an important consideration in occupation policy development. The women's experience with Hamburgers and Coca-Cola also influenced their expectations and attitudes regarding other aspects of American culture and society. Several women expressed curiosity about American educational systems, medical practices, and social customs, recognizing that their assumptions about Western civilization might require revision based on their direct observations of American behavior and capabilities. As days passed following the special meal, the Japanese women began to develop more complex and nuanced perspectives on their captors and their situation. The gesture had created an opening for communication and cultural exchange that extended beyond the basic administrative requirements of detention facility management. Some women began to engage in limited conversations with American personnel through Captain Chen's interpretation, asking questions about American society and sharing observations about cultural differences and similarities. The psychological transformation experienced by the women was gradual but significant. The initial fear and anticipation of harsh treatment had given way to cautious curiosity about American intentions and values. The meal had served as a catalyst for this change, providing concrete evidence that Americans were capable of considering the well-being and dignity of their former enemies, even in the context of military detention and security requirements. Sachiko emerged as a particularly important figure in facilitating communication between the Japanese women and American personnel. Her combination of language skills, technical background, and diplomatic temperament made her an effective intermediary for addressing concerns and coordinating activities within the facility. Her evolving perspective on American character and capabilities influenced other women and contributed to the gradual development of more cooperative relationships. The special meal also had unintended consequences for American personnel who found themselves reconsidering their own assumptions about Japanese culture and character. The dignified and gracious response of the women to American hospitality contradicted stereotypes about Japanese fanaticism and cultural rigidity that had been promoted during the conflict. American soldiers began to appreciate the complexity and sophistication of Japanese social customs and the individual humanity of people they had previously viewed primarily as enemies. Several weeks after the Hamburger and Coca-Cola meal, Lieutenant Morrison authorized a series of additional cultural exchange activities designed to build upon the positive results of the initial gesture. These included sharing American music and literature with interested detainees, as well as providing opportunities for Japanese women to share aspects of their own culture with American personnel. The reciprocal nature of these exchanges helped to break down barriers and create mutual understanding that facilitated more effective facility management. Captain Chen found his role evolving from simple translation to complex cultural mediation, as both American and Japanese individuals sought to understand and appreciate perspectives that differed from their own experiences and assumptions. His position as a bridge between cultures became increasingly important as the detention facility evolved from a simple holding operation into a laboratory for post-conflict reconciliation and relationship building. The impact of the meal experience extended beyond the immediate environment of the detention facility, as word of the positive interactions spread through military channels and influenced policy discussions about prisoner treatment and occupation strategies. The demonstration that humanitarian gestures could produce strategic benefits became an important factor in developing approaches to post-conflict administration and the establishment of cooperative relationships with former enemy populations. For the Japanese women, the meal represented a turning point in their understanding of their captors and their prospects for the future. The evidence of American generosity and consideration provided hope that their eventual repatriation might be conducted with dignity and that the post-conflict world might offer opportunities for peaceful coexistence rather than continued hostility and mistrust. The memory of tasting hamburgers and Coca-Cola for the first time became a powerful symbol of transformation and possibility for women who had expected only hardship and humiliation from their captivity. The experience challenged their preconceptions about American character, while also opening their minds to new possibilities for cultural understanding and cooperation that would prove valuable in the years of reconstruction and reconciliation that lay ahead. As autumn progressed into winter, the detention facility continued to serve as a model for prisoner administration that emphasized humanitarian treatment and cultural sensitivity. The success of the initial meal program led to the establishment of regular special events and cultural exchange activities that benefited both American personnel and Japanese detainees. The positive atmosphere that developed within the facility became a source of pride for American administrators and a source of hope for Japanese individuals who faced an uncertain future. The women's experience also influenced their families and communities upon their eventual repatriation. Their accounts of American treatment and their observations about American society contributed to shifting attitudes within Japanese civilian populations that were struggling to understand the implications of defeat and the prospects for recovery under foreign occupation. The personal testimonies of women who had experienced American hospitality firsthand carried greater credibility and emotional impact than official pronouncements or propaganda materials. Sachiko's detailed letters to her family following her repatriation included extensive descriptions of her detention experience and her evolving understanding of American character and values. Her accounts of the Hamburger and Coca-Cola meal became particularly significant in illustrating the unexpected humanity and generosity that she had encountered from former enemies. These personal narratives contributed to broader social discussions about the nature of the conflict and the possibilities for future peaceful relations. Nurse Yamamoto incorporated her observations about American medical practices and nutritional science into her post-conflict professional development. Her experience with American food and her interactions with American medical personnel influenced her approach to patient care and her understanding of the relationship between nutrition and health. The knowledge she gained during her detention became valuable both for her individual practice and for the broader development of Japanese medical education and practice. Teacher Sato underwent a fundamental reassessment of her educational philosophy and curriculum following her repatriation. Her direct experience of American culture and her observations of the gap between propaganda narratives and actual American behavior led her to advocate for more balanced and accurate presentations of foreign cultures in Japanese educational materials. Her influence on educational policy contributed to post-conflict reforms that emphasized critical thinking and cultural understanding. Radio operator Nakamura applied her analytical skills and her insights into American capabilities to post-conflict reconstruction efforts. Her understanding of American industrial and logistical systems, gained partly through her observations during detention, informed her contributions to discussions about economic recovery and technological development. The knowledge she acquired about American society and values influenced her work in facilitating communication and cooperation between Japanese and American personnel during the occupation period. The other women who participated in the meal carried their own individual lessons and insights into their post-conflict lives. Each woman's experience contributed to the broader transformation of Japanese society's understanding of the outside world and the possibilities for peaceful coexistence with former enemies. The collective impact of their personal narratives helped to create a foundation for reconciliation and cooperation that would prove essential for Japan's recovery and development. The detention facility continued to operate for several months following the initial meal program, serving as a model for prisoner administration that other military units adapted for their own operations. The success of the humanitarian approach demonstrated at the facility influenced broader military policy and contributed to the development of occupation strategies that emphasized building cooperative relationships rather than simply maintaining control through force and intimidation. Lieutenant Morrison's career was significantly enhanced by his innovative approach to prisoner administration and his demonstration that humanitarian treatment could produce both moral and strategic benefits. His methods were studied and replicated at other facilities throughout the Pacific Theater, contributing to improved relations between American forces and Japanese civilians during the critical transition period following the end of hostilities. The legacy of the Hamburger and Coca-Cola meal extended far beyond its immediate participants to influence broader patterns of cultural exchange and understanding between America and Japan. The gesture demonstrated the power of simple human kindness to bridge even the most profound political and cultural divides, providing a foundation for the remarkable transformation of former enemies into close allies and partners in the post-conflict world. Years later, as Japan and America developed into close allies and trading partners, the story of the detention facility meal served as a powerful symbol of the possibility for reconciliation and cooperation between former enemies. The women who had participated in that first taste of American food became living witnesses to the potential for understanding and friendship that could emerge from even the most unlikely circumstances. The economic implications of the women's exposure to American consumer products also proved significant in the long term. Their positive impressions of American food quality and variety contributed to the development of consumer markets for American products in post-conflict Japan. The memory of Hamburgers and Coca-Cola created demand for American brands and food styles that would become important elements in the cultural and economic relationship between the two countries. The technological insights gained by the women during their detention experience influenced their understanding of American manufacturing and distribution capabilities. Their observations about the quality and consistency of American consumer products contributed to Japanese efforts to study and adapt American production methods during the Reconstruction period. The industrial knowledge they acquired became part of the broader technology transfer that facilitated Japan's rapid economic recovery and development. The social and cultural impact of the meal experience continued to resonate through Japanese society for decades following the conflict. The story became part of the collective memory of the war period and the transition to peace, illustrating the complexity of human relationships even during times of political conflict. The narrative served as a reminder that individual acts of kindness and understanding could transcend the barriers created by ideology and nationalism. Educational institutions in both America and Japan eventually incorporated the story into curricula designed to promote international understanding and peace education. The account of Japanese women tasting hamburgers and Coca-Cola for the first time became a powerful example of how cultural exchange and human contact could break down prejudices and create foundations for lasting friendship and cooperation between former enemies. The medical and nutritional insights gained by Nurse Yamamoto during her detention experience contributed to important developments in Japanese healthcare and dietary science. Her observations about the relationship between nutrition and health, informed by her exposure to American food and medical practices, influenced her subsequent work in promoting improved dietary standards and medical care for Japanese civilians during the challenging years of post-conflict recovery. The communications and analytical skills that radio operator Nakamura developed through her interactions with American personnel served her well in post-conflict reconstruction work. Her ability to bridge cultural and linguistic barriers became valuable in facilitating cooperation between Japanese and American organizations during the occupation period. The insights she gained into American society and business practices contributed to the development of trade relationships and economic partnerships. Teacher Sato's transformed understanding of education and cultural exchange influenced a generation of Japanese students who learned from her revised approach to teaching about foreign cultures and international relations. Her emphasis on critical thinking and direct observation over propaganda and stereotypes contributed to the development of more sophisticated and nuanced perspectives on international affairs among Japanese young people. The detention facility itself was eventually converted to other uses as the immediate post-conflict period ended and normal civilian administration was restored. However, the building continued to serve as a symbol of the possibility for humanitarian treatment and cultural understanding, even under the most difficult circumstances. Veterans of both American and Japanese forces occasionally visited the site to reflect on the lessons learned and the relationships built during that crucial transition period. The broader military and political implications of the detention facility's success influenced American occupation policy throughout Japan and other post-conflict situations. The demonstration that humanitarian treatment could produce both moral and strategic benefits became an important element in American approaches to post-conflict administration and the development of cooperative relationships with former enemy populations. The personal relationships that developed between American personnel and Japanese detainees at the facility continued in some cases long after the formal end of the detention period. Several American soldiers maintained correspondence with Japanese women they had met during the facility operations, creating lasting friendships that spanned cultural and national boundaries. These personal connections contributed to broader patterns of cultural exchange and understanding that facilitated the remarkable transformation of American-Japanese relations. The story of the Hamburger and Coca-Cola meal became part of the oral history of both American military units and Japanese civilian communities. Veterans shared the account with family members and friends, contributing to popular understanding of the complexity and humanity that could emerge even during times of conflict and political tension. The narrative served as a powerful reminder that individual actions and choices could have profound and lasting impact on international relations and cultural understanding. As the decades passed, scholarly research into the post-conflict period increasingly recognized the importance of individual human experiences and cultural exchanges in facilitating reconciliation and cooperation between former enemies. The account of Japanese women's first taste of American food became an important case study in the power of cultural diplomacy and humanitarian gestures to create foundations for lasting peace and friendship. The economic success of American food companies in Japanese markets during the post-conflict period was influenced in part by positive associations created during early exposure experiences like the detention facility meal. The memory of quality American food products contributed to consumer acceptance of American brands and food styles that became important elements in the bilateral economic relationship between the two countries. The technological innovations that emerged from American-Japanese cooperation during the Reconstruction period were facilitated by the mutual understanding and respect that had been built through individual experiences of cultural exchange and humanitarian treatment. The foundation of trust, created by gestures like the detention facility meal, contributed to the willingness of both societies to share knowledge and collaborate on technological development projects. The social changes that transformed Japanese society during the post-conflict period were influenced by individual experiences of exposure to American culture and values. The women who had tasted hamburgers and Coca-Cola for the first time became informal ambassadors for cultural understanding and cooperation, sharing their insights and observations with family members and communities throughout Japan. And that concludes our story. If you made it this far, please share your thoughts in the comments. What part of this historical account surprised you most? Don't forget to subscribe for more untold stories from World War II and check out the video on screen for another incredible tale from history. Until next time.